The wrench slipped and Roe hit his knuckle on the pipe casing. He hissed through his teeth, pulled his hand back, shook it once and went right back to work. That was the thing about the lower bays at 300, nobody came down here. No supervisors, no alien crew members doing their hourly walkthroughs, no one asking questions or filing reports. Just the low hum of the station's coolant lines, the distant vibration of docked freighters, and Roe with his tools and his thoughts. He liked it that way. Bay 7 smelled like burnt coolant and old metal. The freighter he was working on, a mid-range cargo hauler registered to some merchant outfit from the outer systems, had a cracked secondary exhaust manifold and a fuel relay that someone had clearly repaired 3 times before with parts that were never meant for that model. Whoever did the previous work had no idea what they were doing. Roe was fixing other people's mistakes, which was more or less what he did every night. He hummed as he worked. An old song, nothing with a name, just something his father used to whistle while fixing the family's ground truck back on Earth. The melody wandered and doubled back on itself. He did not think about it. His hands moved and the song came out and the work got done. At 3:40, he heard something. He stopped humming, lay still under the belly of the freighter and listened. A scratching sound, small, coming from somewhere inside the lower panel to his left, the heat shield access on the port underbelly. He frowned. There were no moving parts behind that panel, nothing that should make noise. Then a cry, soft, warbling like something wet and tired trying to be loud and failing. Roe slid out from under the freighter and crouched in front of the panel. He pressed his ear to it. Another cry, then a second voice joining it, then a third. 3 distinct sounds, all small, all unhappy. He thought about calling it in. There were protocols for unknown life forms in restricted areas. You were supposed to contact the biosafety team, stand back, wait for the professionals. He knew this. Instead, he reached out, unlatched the panel clips one by one, and eased the cover off slowly, setting it down on the floor without a sound. 3 pairs of eyes blinked at him from the dark. They were small, about the size of large house cats, and covered in scales that were still soft-looking, not fully hardened yet. Their wings were folded tight against their bodies. Their tails curled under them. Their eyes were deep amber, wide and reflecting the dim bay light like 2 little lanterns each. Dragon hatchlings. Roe sat back on the floor and looked at them. They looked at him. The smallest one hissed, showing teeth that were sharp but very tiny. The middle one made the warbling cry again and pressed back further into the crawl space. The largest one, slightly bigger than the others, with a faint ridge forming along its brow, just stared. Roe did not move. He did not reach in. He did not make a sound. He had grown up on a farm on the outskirts of a small town where the soil was bad and the winters were long. His father kept animals, not livestock, just animals, the kind that showed up hurt or lost and never quite left. He had learned early that when something was frightened, you did not fill the space with noise and movement. You made yourself smaller. You waited. So he waited. After 3 minutes, the largest hatchling inched forward, sniffed the air toward him, pulled back, inched forward again. Roe reached into his chest pocket without looking away and pulled out a ration pack. He tore it open quietly and set it on the floor in front of the panel. Dried protein strips and a few grain crackers. Not dragon food, probably. He had no idea what dragon food was, but hungry was hungry. The smell hit them. All 3 heads came forward this time. The largest one crept out first, grabbed a protein strip, and retreated to eat it with suspicious glances. Then the middle one. Then the smallest, who took 2 crackers and a strip and went back into the corner and ate with great intensity and no shame at all. Roe opened a second ration pack, set it down, waited. By 4:30, all 3 hatchlings were out of the crawl space. By 4:45, the largest one had sniffed his boot, his knee, and then his hand with great deliberation before deciding none of these were threats. By 500, the smallest one, who had turned out to be the boldest once fed, was asleep against his left thigh. Ro sat very still and watched the middle one pace in small circles before finally settling against his right side. The largest one climbed onto his chest, turned twice, and lay down with its chin on his collarbone. He meant to report it. He would do it at the end of shift, he told himself. He would call Breck, explain the situation, and they would figure out who to contact. It would all get sorted. The coolant lines hummed. The station turned slowly in the dark. Ro closed his eyes for just a moment. Above him, 3 floors up and running on no sleep, Commander Yull was staring at an emergency alert that had been active for 2 hours. 3 Varath hatchlings, missing from their nesting suite. The mother had already cracked the wall of Corridor 14 with her tail. Down in Bay 7, none of that noise reached the floor. Ro was asleep. The hatchlings were asleep. The wrench he had been using rested against his knee. Everything was very quiet. Commander Yull had handled a lot of bad nights in his 12 years running Durakan 7. There was the coolant breach of Year 4 that flooded 3 cargo bays, the fuel smuggling case that turned into a hostage situation, the time a Grellian freighter captain had a medical episode mid-docking and took out 2 walkway struts on the way down. None of those had made him feel like the floor might give way under his feet. This did. Sara was not yelling anymore. That was the problem. For the first 40 minutes after the hatchlings were discovered missing, she had been loud. Her grief had filled the corridors like a physical thing, a sound that pressed against the walls and made the metal groan. Crew members had retreated 3 levels in either direction without being told to. But now she was quiet. She stood in the main atrium of Level 4, and she was absolutely still, and her eyes had gone the flat pale color that the older Varath crew had warned Yull about during his first month on station. They had been very specific. Loud and grieving is dangerous, they had told him. Quiet and still means she has made a decision. Yull did not want to know what the decision was. He had every security officer on shift running a systematic sweep of the station, all 18 levels, every bay, every storage corridor and maintenance crawlspace. He had locked the docking ports. He had pulled the internal sensor logs and handed them to his best analyst. He had done everything right in the right order, and it had been 3 hours, and there was nothing. Dren stood beside Sara. He was older than her by what the Varath measured in decades, his scales a deeper, darker shade, worn smooth at the edges. He had said very little since the search began. When he did speak, he spoke to Yull directly, and his voice was the kind of quiet that had weight behind it. "If they are harmed," Dren said, "the responsibility falls to this station." "We are doing everything we can," Yull said. "Do more." Yull did not argue. He turned back to his comm panel and sent another sweep order down to the lower levels. The night crew was thinned down there, mostly solo operators running maintenance on the docked ships. Bay 1 through 5 had already been cleared. Bay 6 had come back empty. Bay 7 was next. Bay 7 was assigned to 1 crew member on the night rotation. Yull checked the name. Ro, human, mechanic 3rd grade, 3 years on station, clean record, no flags. Currently logged as on shift and active, last check-in at 2200 before the alarm started. No response to the general alert that had gone out at 1:30. Yull frowned at that. He flagged it and sent a direct ping. No response. He sent a second one. Nothing. He pulled up the Bay 7 internal sensor feed. The Bay cameras were old, lower levels always got the last of the upgrade budget, and the resolution was poor. The image was dark, lit mostly by the working lights Ro had left running near the hauler in the center of the bay. Yull leaned in. He could see the mechanic, sitting against the far wall, head tilted back, asleep by the look of it, which explained the missed pings. And on him, draped across him, tucked against him, piled over his lap like they had always belonged there, were three small shapes with folded wings and copper gold scales. Yull stared at the screen for 4 full seconds. Then he turned around very slowly. Sora was still watching him from across the atrium. Her pale eyes had not moved. Yull looked back at the screen. He looked at the three shapes. He looked at the way the largest one had its head resting on the human's forearm. He looked at how deeply, peacefully still all three of them were. He thought very carefully about what to say. "Commander," his junior officer appeared at his shoulder. "Sweep team is approaching Base 7 now. Shall I have them go in and retrieve the hatchlings?" Yull thought about 3 sleeping dragon hatchlings. He thought about 6 armed officers walking into a room and making sudden noise. He thought about what happened when hatchlings were startled. He thought about what happened when Sora heard that her young had been frightened. "Tell them," Yull said carefully, "to stop outside the bay door. Do not enter, do not make noise, do not touch anything, just stop and wait." The officer looked confused. "Sir." "Tell them I said so." He reached for his comm to call Sora, and then he stopped, because Sora was already walking toward him. She had seen his face change. In 12 years, Yull had learned that very little escaped a Varath matriarch's attention. She stopped at his shoulder and looked at the screen. The silence that followed was the longest of Yull's career. "She has not moved in 3 hours," Sora said at last. Her voice was different now. Not the sharp edge of before, something slower, something that Yull could not name. Yull said quietly. "That is Ro, he is one of our mechanics." Sora said nothing. On the screen, the human slept on, completely unaware, 3 sacred Varath hatchlings rising and falling gently with his breathing. Dren appeared behind them both. He looked at the screen. His expression did not change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "This is not possible," he said. "The sensors don't lie," Yull said. Dren looked at the screen a moment longer. Then he looked at Sora. Sora was already moving toward the lift. Breck arrived for his morning shift at 600, the way he always did, early, loud, carrying 2 cups of something hot and already talking before he was through the door. "Ro, you hear about the lockdown. Whole station was running sweeps all night. Varath hatchlings went missing apparently, 3 of them. Command has been." He stopped. He looked at the far wall of Base 7. He looked at Ro, asleep on the floor back against the wall, head tilted, mouth slightly open. He looked at the 3 hatchlings arranged across the man like decorations. He looked at the largest one, whose head was resting on Ro's forearm with the ease of something that had never once felt unsafe. He looked at the smallest one, whose tiny tail was looped once around Ro's ankle. He looked at the middle one, tucked in the space between Ro's left knee and the wall, eyes shut, breathing slow. Breck stood in the doorway for a very long time. Then, without looking away from the scene, he set both cups of hot liquid down very gently on the floor beside the door. He backed out of the bay 1 slow step at a time. He reached the corridor. He stood there in the empty hallway under the cold overhead lights and stared at the wall across from him. He opened his comm. "This is Breck," he said quietly. "In Base 7 I found the hatchlings." He paused. "Do not send anyone in loud." He was told to hold position. He held it. Within 10 minutes, 6 security officers arrived at the far end of the corridor. They came in fast, the way they had been trained. Breck held up all 4 of his hands in a stopping gesture and pointed urgently at the bay entrance and then put 1 finger in front of his face. The lead officer slowed. The team stopped. Breck waved them forward quietly, 1 at a time, and let them look through the open bay door. He watched their faces go through the same sequence his had: confusion, recognition, stillness. Nobody moved. Word spread the way it always does on a station, quietly, fast, and to everyone at once. By 6:30, there were 14 crew members standing in the corridor outside Base 7, looking through the open door in silence. A churn technician from Level 3, 2 Orin cargo handlers, a Brelkin engineer who had come down to check on her hauler and had completely forgotten about the hauler. Someone was recording on a personal device. Breck considered telling them to stop and decided it did not matter. Inside the bay, Rose slept on. The hatchlings slept on. The only sounds were the ventilation system and the faint settling noise of the hauler cooling in the middle of the bay. At 6:41, the crowd parted. They did not do it because anyone told them to. They did it the way small animals move away from something large, not in panic, just in the quick, wordless understanding that something bigger needed the space. Sora moved through them without looking at them. She was not running. She was not making a sound. She walked with the particular stillness of a creature that had made itself careful on purpose, and that carefulness was somehow more frightening than the noise she had made earlier. She reached the bay entrance and stopped. She looked at the scene inside. The corridor was absolutely silent. 14 crew members held their breath collectively. Breck could not feel his own feet. Sora stood in the doorway for a long time. Her eyes moved over each hatchling in turn, checking, reading, the way a mother does without needing to touch. She looked at the way they were resting. She looked at the way their muscles were loose and their wings were flat and their tails were uncurled. She looked at the warmth in the small space between Rose's body and the wall where the middle hatchling had wedged itself. She looked at Ro. He was, by any measure, unremarkable. A medium-sized human with grease on his clothes and a scrape on one knuckle, mouth open, snoring faintly. He had a ration wrapper beside him on the floor and a spread of tools near the hauler that he had clearly abandoned mid-job. Sora did not move to collect her young. She watched. At 6:48, Ro shifted. His head came up slowly, the way people do when they are not startled awake but simply done sleeping. He opened one eye, then the other. He looked at the ceiling, he looked at his lap, he looked at his forearm. Then he looked up and saw Sora standing in the doorway, 6 meters tall, staring at him with pale, flat eyes. To his credit, he did not shout. He did not scramble back. His shoulders came up slightly, just a breath of surprise, and then they settled again. He looked at Sora. He looked at the hatchlings. He looked back at Sora. "Morning," he said. His voice was rough with sleep but steady. "I was going to find you, He stopped, looked down at the hatchlings again. I didn't want to wake them." In the corridor, no one breathed. Sora had not blinked. Sora stepped into the bay. The crowd in the corridor did not follow. They stayed where they were, packed in quietly, watching through the open door as though the bay had become something delicate that too much attention might break. Ro had not moved. He was still sitting against the wall with 3 hatchlings on him, looking up at a dragon matriarch the way a person looks at something they are not sure how to read. Not terrified, not performing calm, just waiting. Sora stopped 3 meters away and lowered her head slightly, bringing her eyes level with him. It made her look even larger. Ro held still. "Why did you not call for help?" she said. It was not quite a question. "I thought about it," Ro said, "but they just settled down. They were shaking when I found them. I didn't want to bring a lot of noise and lights in and start the whole thing over again." Sora regarded him. "You were afraid of frightening them." "Yes." "Were you afraid of them?" Ro looked down at the hatchlings for a moment. The largest one, the one on his forearm, had opened one eye at the sound of Sora's voice, looked at her, and closed it again. "A little," he said, "at first, then not really." Something moved behind Sora's eyes. Not warmth yet. Something that came before warmth, the slow process of re-examining a conclusion. She said nothing for a moment. Then she looked at the smallest hatchling, the one on his chest with its chin on his collarbone. "That one," she said. "Her name is Tulla. She has never rested against a stranger." Ro looked down at Tulla. Tulla made a small sound without opening her eyes. "She seemed to want to," Ro said. The noise came from the corridor before Sara could answer, a heavy, deliberate sound that was Dren arriving. The crowd split again. He was larger than Sara by a full head, older, his scales the deep charcoal color of something that had been through a great deal of time. He stood in the doorway and took in the scene, and his expression was the controlled stillness of a creature working hard to manage what it was feeling. What it was feeling was clearly not positive. "The human will step away from the young," Dren said. Rose started to shift. The hatchlings did not cooperate. Vor, the largest, tightened his grip on Rose's forearm without waking. Ket, wedged against the wall, pressed closer. Tulla made a sharp, unhappy sound and dug in. Rose stopped moving. He looked at Dren with something like an apology. "I'm trying." "Dren," Sora's voice was quiet, it stopped him. "He handled the sacred young without consent or knowledge," Dren said. "Station protocol requires." "He fed them and kept still and let them sleep." Sora's voice did not rise. "Look at them." Dren looked, his jaw tightened. "They are relaxed," Sora said. "All three. You know what Vor does with strangers. You know how long it took him to sleep near even us at that age." She paused. "He has been using this human's arm as a resting place for," she glanced at Ro, "how long?" "Since about 3:30, Ro said. 5 hours, Sora said. Dren said nothing. Yul had appeared behind Dren in the doorway, keeping a careful distance from both dragons and clearly hopping not to be addressed directly. Several other crew members craned to see past him. It was a churn technician from level 6, a quiet older woman named Pris who had worked the station for 9 years, who spoke from somewhere in the middle of the crowd. "They do that," she said. "Humans, the ones on my level, when something is hurt or lost or scared, they just go slow, get low, get quiet. I've seen Ro do it with that 3-legged dock cat that lives near the fuel lines. Whole station couldn't catch that animal for 2 months. Ro caught it in about an hour." No one responded immediately. Then one of the Orin cargo handlers said, "The new human on level 9 did the same thing last cycle. There was a Grenathi lizard loose in the duct system. Maintenance was ready to flush it. She just sat down near the duct opening with some food and waited." "My shift partner," said someone else, "does that when crew members are upset, just sits nearby, doesn't say much. It's strange, but it works." The corridor had turned, without anyone planning it, into a quiet gallery of observations. Species that had worked alongside humans for months and years, each one offering a small piece of a picture they had not known they were building. Dren listened. His expression did not change, but he had stopped moving toward Ro. Ro himself was looking at the floor, deeply uncomfortable with being the subject of this much attention. "I just didn't want them to be scared," he said. "That's it, that's the whole thing." Sara looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Dren. "A formal review," she said quietly, "as tradition requires." It was not a question. Dren looked at the hatchlings one more time. Then he gave a short, stiff nod. Sara turned back to Ro. "Can you walk with them on you, or do we wait?" Ro looked at the 3 hatchlings. He looked at the half-finished freighter behind him. He looked at his cold cup of nothing and the ration wrapper on the floor. "I can walk," he said. From the back of the crowd, Breck said, in a tone of complete sincerity, "This is the most human thing I have ever seen in my life." The main concourse of Durakan 7 was built wide enough to host 6 docked ships side by side and had never felt small. It felt a little small now. The Varath formal review was not a trial. Ro had been told this 3 times on the way up from Base 7, by Yul, by Breck, and by a nervous junior officer who had clearly been assigned to reassure him. Ro had nodded each time and said nothing, partly because he understood and partly because Tulla was still on his shoulder, and he was trying not to move too quickly and disturb her. She had transferred herself there sometime during the walk. Vor and Ket had accepted being collected by Sara, with some complaint. Tulla had climbed from his chest to his shoulder and locked her claws in lightly, and that had been that. Sora had looked at this, looked at Ro, and chosen not to address it. The concourse had filled by the time they arrived. Word had gone out through the station the way words always did. Nobody officially announced it, but everybody came. Species from a dozen worlds stood in loose groups along the edges of the space, close enough to watch, far enough to give the center room. There was a low background noise of translation devices and quiet conversation, but when Sora and Dren took their positions in the center of the concourse, the room settled. Dren spoke first. His voice carried without effort, the kind of voice that had been used to large spaces for a very long time. He laid out the facts plainly. 3 Vareth hatchlings, sacred young of the colony, had been found in contact with an outsider without knowledge, consent, or oversight. Station protocol had not been followed. Vareth tradition required a formal examination of the circumstances before the colony could determine the nature of the contact. He was precise and fair, even if his tone made clear that he considered the whole situation deeply irregular. Then Sora spoke. She did not present the night the way a lawyer would. She described it the way someone describes something they are still trying to understand. She talked about what she had seen on the sensor screen, the stillness of the hatchlings, the looseness of their bodies, the way Vor had been using a stranger's arm for a pillow. She said that Vor, as a hatchling, had taken 4 months to sleep comfortably near even his own parents. She said that Ket had not made her distress sound once in 5 hours, which was notable for a hatchling that found everything distressing. She described walking into Bay 7. She described the smell of the space, grease and metal, and the dry cracker scent of the rations Ro had given them. She described the human's face when he woke up, the way the surprise came and went quickly, the way he had looked at the hatchlings before he looked at her to check on them first. He was afraid, Sora said, a small amount and briefly, and then he was not because his concern for them was greater than his concern for himself. The concourse was quiet. It was Pris, the churn technician, who spoke next. She had not been asked to, but nobody stopped her, and in the pause after Sora finished, her voice came from the left side of the room. She talked about the dock cat, the 3-legged animal that had lived in the fuel line corridors and bitten everyone who tried to catch it for 2 months. She said she had watched Ro through a porthole one evening. He had taken his lunch break near the corridor entrance and sat on the floor and eaten, and paid the cat no attention at all, and the cat had come to him. Someone else offered that the human crew on Level 9 had stopped 2 maintenance flushes of occupied duct systems in the past year by sitting near the openings with food and waiting. Another voice mentioned that the human medic on shift rotation always crouched down to be at eye level before speaking to injured crew members, whatever species they were. A Brelkin engineer said quietly, "They go small. When something is scared, they make themselves smaller and slower. I noticed it, but I did not think about it until now." "They do not show teeth unless they mean it," said someone from the back. "They hum," said another voice. "When they are working alone, I thought it was a mechanical sound the first time. It is not. They hum to themselves." Ro stood in the center of all this with Tulla on his shoulder and his hands in his pockets, and the expression of a man who wanted very much to be back under a broken freighter. Breck, standing at his right shoulder, said quietly, "You are being complimented. Stop looking at the floor." "I know," Ro muttered, "it's a lot." The picture that built in the concourse over the next 30 minutes had no architect. No one had planned it. It assembled itself out of small pieces, individual observations from crew members who had worked beside humans for months and years and noticed things they had not thought to name before. Not warriors, not diplomats, not remarkable engineers or fighters or strategists. Just creatures that other creatures decided to trust. Dren listened to all of it. He stood very still and he listened, and his face gave almost nothing away. Only his eyes moved, tracking each speaker in turn. When the room ran out of things to say, He was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at Ro. "I have a question for you," Dren said. The concourse went still. Ro looked up from the floor. "All right," he said. Dren's question when it came was simple. "What are you," he said, "that our young trust you?" It was not hostile. It was not a challenge. It was the kind of question that comes from someone who has been carrying it for a while and has finally decided to ask it plainly. Ro thought about it. He did not answer quickly, which seemed to be the right choice, because Dren waited without impatience. "I don't know how to answer that as a species thing." Ro said at last, "I can only tell you what I know from my own life." He paused. "My father kept animals. We had land with a lot of space. He taught me early that anything alive, anything, is going to be afraid sometimes. And fear makes things dangerous. The safest thing you can do around a frightened animal is not add to the fear." He shifted slightly. Tulla adjusted her grip on his shoulder without waking. "You go slow, you go small. You don't stare them down. You let them come to you or not come to you. And if they don't come, you leave them alone and try again later." He looked at his own hands for a moment. He said the goal isn't to catch the animal. The goal is to make them feel like they don't need to run. The concourse was very quiet. "Those three found a warm, dark space and hid in it," Ro continued. "They were scared. I didn't want them to feel more scared. That's all I did. I just didn't make it worse." Dren looked at him for a long time. Then he did something that made the air in the concourse change. It was a small movement, a slight lowering of his head, barely more than an inclination. Not submission, not apology. The kind of acknowledgement one gives to something that has earned a response. The Varath crew members along the edges of the room straightened slightly. A few of them exchanged looks. This was not a gesture Dren gave often, if the reaction meant anything. Sara stepped forward. Her voice was calm and formal, which meant it was going to matter. "By the witness of the colony and the station," she said, "and by the choosing of our young, we name you resting friend to Vor, Ket, and Tulla of the Varath." Ro blinked. "I'm sorry, what does that mean?" "It means," Sora said, "that when they are frightened, when they are lost, when they need safe ground, they may seek you, and you may not turn them away." Ro looked at the three hatchlings. Vor and Ket were with Sara, draped over her foreleg, half asleep. Tulla was still on his shoulder. He considered the weight of this. "That seems fine," he said. "I was going to leave the heat panel loose anyway, so they could get back in if they wanted." Breck, from somewhere behind him, "You were going to leave the panel loose. It doesn't affect anything structurally. The duct's decommissioned." Breck covered his face with two of his four hands. The formal part of the review ended there, though the crowd did not leave quickly. There was a low sound of conversation that spread back through the concourse, not excited, but the kind of sustained talk that happens when people have been given something new to think about and want to think about it together. Yull found Ro near the exit, trying to get Tulla off his shoulder so he could go back to work. "You understand," Yull said carefully, "that a Varath resting friend title is not a small thing." "I got that impression," Ro said. "There are written records of it being granted, historically, to 6 individuals across all known species. Total. In recorded history." Ro looked at him. "How many of them were mechanics?" Yull opened his mouth, closed it, "None." Tulla bit his ear gently, the way young animals do when they want attention. He reached up and detached her carefully and handed her to Sara, who had appeared silently at his other side. Sara accepted her youngest with the particular tired patience of a mother who has had a very long night and a very strange morning. She looked at Ro for a moment. "The duct," she said. "It'll stay loose," he said. She nodded once, then she walked away, hatchlings in tow. Ro went back to Bay 7. The Brelkin engineer's hauler was still sitting in the middle of the floor with its cooling manifold half-fixed. He picked up his wrench, got back under it, and started humming the old song again, the one his father used to play, the one he never knew all the words to. The next night, he found Vor and Ket waiting inside the open duct panel when he arrived for his shift. Tulla was on top of the panel, looking at him with the flat, unblinking certainty of a creature that has decided something and will not be reconsidered. By the end of the week, the lower crew had begun steering visiting ships away from Base 7 without being told to. No announcement had been made. The bay was still on the official work roster. People just made other arrangements. Breck sent a message to his family back home on Churn Station. He had been trying to explain humans for 2 years without much success. He sat for a while thinking about how to do it, and then he wrote. They are the kind of creature that other creatures decide to trust, not because they are strong or clever or powerful, but because they go quiet when things are afraid and they wait and they do not push. I have been trying to understand them for 2 years and I think I finally have a piece of it. They do not try to be safe. They just are. He sent it and went back to work. In Base 7, under the belly of a different hauler now, Ro reached his hand out without looking, and Tulla put a socket wrench into it like she had done it 100 times. He fit the wrench onto the bolt and kept going. Above them, the station turned through the dark. Somewhere in it, in the slow and ordinary rhythm of the night shift, 400 crew members from a dozen worlds were doing their jobs, living their lives, figuring out the small and daily work of existing alongside each other. And in Bay 7, the heat shield panel was loose. Just in case.